Well, hello again, and thank you for joining me. We are in the book of Genesis, and we're in chapter 28. So thankful for you being along for the ride. We're over halfway through this marvelous book. We've seen Abraham and his significance. He's now dead, and we've got him in the grave. And now we're moving on to his children and his grandchildren. And what we have is a lot of drama that's taking place. And so I appreciate you for being here for the book of Genesis as we're studying this. It's kind of a side note. We're planning to go just this week with the Missionaries for America program. We're planning to go to the Creation Museum up there in Kentucky. Yeah, and they just dominate this concept of Genesis, especially the opening chapters. And so I'm really looking forward to that. We're going to go visit the Ark Encounter, etc. Going to be a good trip. Can't wait. But Genesis 28 today. Here's where we're going. Here's where we are going. There are your questions for today. I hope that I've put them there in a succinct manner that you'll be able to take a picture of that. And as we pedal through this particular material, you'll be able to answer those questions. And if not, you can look up the passages for yourself, because that's the whole concept of the Restoration for School of Biblical Studies, is so that we can let the Bible speak. So moving on. All right, here we go. By way of review, creation, chapter 1. A retelling of creation in chapter 2. Fall of man in chapter 3. Cain kills Abel in 4. 5. We trace the lineage of Adam all the way to Noah, and then Noah gets the assignment from God. It's time to build the big boat. And so he does. Flood comes upon the earth. See the 7. We've got them coming off the boat in chapter 8. And chapter 9, the covenant between Noah and God as well as the earth. Noah's descendants in chapter 10 are going to begin to disperse, except for a bunch of them who decide they're going to stick together and they're going to build the Tower of Babel, make a name for themselves. And in that particular process, God's not going to be pleased, comes down there, it confuses their languages, and they eventually do spread out. Chapter 12, we're going to see Abram. Notice it's Abram called to the Canaan land. You can kind of see the picture that Gabriel has drawn here, so kind of going down the map. Abram is going to be called to Canaan. And so he's going to make that journey around the Fertile Crescent. Once he gets there, we're going to see in chapter 13 that Abram and Lot got too much stuff, and they're going to have to separate because their folks are fighting. Materialism does that, does it not? A lot of applications here in the book of Genesis for our present day life. Don't live on top of each other, Tower of Babel. Be careful with materialism because it's going to divide you. Don't be all enamored with socialization, because that's what happens here. Lot's going to leave Abram, and he's going to start wandering towards the big lights of the big city. And in the process, he's going to lose his children, he's going to lose his wife, because it's all about socialization rather than actually being with God. Chapter 11, we're going to see Abram has to rescue Lot because he's been taken off when the kings came in and invaded. On the way back, after rescuing Lot, he's going to meet Melchizedek. Chapter 15 and 17, big passages with regards to the covenant between God and Abraham. In between, you got this little interlude with the birth of Ishmael. He's going to come up, by the way, in our class today. Chapter 17, we've got the sealing of the covenant with blood with regards to circumcision. Chapter 18, Abram's going to have those 3 visitors going to come. Remember Lot, he's down here living in the city of Sodom now. And Abram's coming, he's really concerned. It is Abraham at this point, isn't it? Because remember, we changed his name here in chapter 17. Abraham's going to be really concerned because he knows the perversion of that particular city. And he's going to dicker with God and get them all the way down. If you find 10 righteous people, won't you save the city? God says, if I can find 10, we'll save the city. Can't find 10. It just shows you how ridiculously screwed up Lot's values were. Not unlike today. Sending our children off to let the public schools teach them the values of life. Think about that. Well, anyhow, chapter 18, Abraham's very, very concerned. And we're going to see that in chapter 19, and sure enough, his concerns come to fruition, and Sodom is going to be destroyed. However, his wife, and his 2 daughters are going to be pulled out of Sodom rather reluctantly. In the process, you're aware, Lot's wife's going to lose her life because she's going to turn back and look back. Couldn't hardly stand it that she'd leave him behind, all the materialism, all the glitz, and all the glory of the socialization of the big lights of the big city, and she turns into a pillar of salt. We know that Lot and his 2 daughters are going to crawl up in a cave. They're going to do all kinds of perversion up in that cave, and things from that point on don't look good for Lot at all. And again, I just can't overemphasize the application from that story of the sad story of Lot. Chapter 20, Abraham called Sarah his sister before the king, which is a half-truth. The king's going to take her into his harem, But God's going to say, no, 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 no. Birth of Isaac, remember, ha, 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 that's what that spells out. No, that's the letters within the number 2 here. That's what Isaac means, laughter. Birth of Isaac in chapter 21. Chapter 22, Abraham's going to be told to sacrifice his son on the altar, which he does. He goes to the very point of pulling the knife. And yet God says, no, no, no. Death of Sarah in chapter 23. Wife for Isaac in chapter 24. You see the 4, it's upside down here. Chapter 25, Abraham dies. And it's interesting. That's the middle chapter of the book of Genesis. And so one of the main iconic characters of the Old Testament, halfway through the book of Genesis, he's gone. And so he dies. But we're going to see that Jacob and Esau are going to be born to Abraham's son, Isaac. And that's going to be a real problem combination there as well. You can see them being brought into the world. In chapter 26, ha, 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 see that? That's Isaac. And that's a well. The wells get filled up, etc. But the big part of chapter 26 is that God's going to bless Isaac. Chapter 27, again, you see it, okay, chapter 27, we're going to see that Isaac is going to give a blessing to Jacob rather than Esau, even though Esau is the firstborn because of the deception. Let's just go with deception. Because of the deception that's taking place there. And then in chapter 28, we've got the story of Jacob's ladder. So that's brings us up to date at this particular point. Okay. All right. Chapter 28 into the text. We're going to see chapter 28, verse 12 as our memory verse for this wonderful chapter. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. And behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And so he's going to have this rather interesting dream. I love the clue that Gabriel has here. Jacob is going to be sent out of camp. Because remember, Esau is out for his head. And he's going to be sent out of camp. Along the way, as he's journeying to his uncle Laban's house, he is going to have this journey, or he's going to have this dream. And it's an odd dream. And you see the memory verse there. And we're going to talk about it more in detail. But I need a drink. You know what I'm saying? I don't have any comments coming up there. I wonder if anybody's even watching. I had to do this in a different way here recently, and I'm just wondering, I hope I've got that all set up right. If I don't, at least it's recording, and we'll go with that. 28:1. Then Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and directed him, you must not take a wife from the Canaanite women. If you remember last time, as we finished up chapter 27, his mama, Rebecca, basically says the same thing. You got to get out of here, but please don't take a wife from this area. And so 2 reasons, evidently, for Jacob to flee the camp. 1, because his brother's out for his head. 2, because I don't want you to marry somebody from around here. Another massive application, Make sure you marry somebody who at least has your godly principles, has that stability with regards to, your family values and all those kind of things. I could go 2 days on that particular subject. But the thing that I find interesting about verse 1 in chapter 28 is that we are seeing that Isaac is going to also call Jacob in, give him the blessing, and head him out. As you end chapter 27, you almost get this feeling that Jacob is so mad at Isaac is so mad at Jacob. Get those right. Isaac is the daddy. If Isaac it seems like Isaac's so mad at Jacob that maybe he leaves the camp without ever saying goodbye to his dad. Well, that's not the case. Evidently, Isaac does call Jacob in, and he blesses him, as we've already seen in the previous chapter. And Isaac, the daddy, whose eyes have gone now and can't see, Isaac is going to say to him, "You need to leave, but please don't take a wife from the Canaanite women." He says, "Arise, go to Padan Aram, to the house of Bethuel, your mother's father, and take your wife from there, and of one of the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother." I think that's one of your questions. And so he's going to say to his son, essentially, what Isaac's daddy said to the servant years ago. Remember, Abraham calls in the servant. He says, "Swear to me that you'll go to such and such place, that you'll and so he brings back a relative, somebody within the family, within the clan, if you will. He brings them back to marry Isaac. That's Rebecca. Okay. Well, Rebecca has a brother. Her name is Laban. We met him earlier on in the story as well. Well, we're going to now send again. It seems like this be this location to go get your wife, and anyhow, and so they're going to send Jacob, and Jacob's going to have to make this journey back there, and he's going to find him more than one wife, but that's for future discussion. All right, so take your wife from the daughters of Laban. Laban is, of course, the brother of Rebekah. Now, God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may become a company of peoples. That's not unlike what has already been said with regards to Isaac. It's not unlike what has already been promised originally to Abraham. And that is, we're just continuing to see the promise of God being passed on. The blessing of God is being passed on. Through you, we're going to see the world expand in a very positive way. And so multiply you and become a company of people. May he give the blessing of Abraham to you and to your offspring with you, that you may take possession of the land of your sojournings that God has given to Abraham. So notice that Isaac's going to speak to Jacob about his granddad, Abraham. And he's going to say, may you receive the same blessing, the same promise from God that your grandfather received years ago. Abraham was promised many things, one of which was a land promise. And this is the land promise that's being passed on now to the grandson, Jacob. And so may you receive the same blessing. Thus Isaac sent Jacob away. So we see him sending him away for two reasons. One, make sure you get a wife not from the Canaanites. And number two, he's sending him away evidently for protection from his older brother Esau. And he went to Padanaram to Laban, the son of Bethuel, the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, Jacob's and Esau's mother. Now, a lot of detail there, don't we? Okay, here's where we're going. Who's this Laban guy? Well, he's the son of Bethuel. And by the way, he's an Aramean, who is the brother of Rebekah, which of course makes him Jacob and Esau's uncle. So there's a lot of information there. But that's the story. Now, you might think with that little period that we're done. We're not. This is just kind of a summation. What happens along the way, you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's just deal with it. Oh, before we do that, I forgot we got this little interlude with regards to Esau. What happens to Esau? Let's deal with him first, then we'll talk about what happens along the way. Now, Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him for Padanaram to take a wife from there, and that as he blessed him, he directed him, you must not take a wife from the Canaanite women. So Esau picks up on this. Daddy doesn't want us to marry from around here. Okay? And notice what Jacob was going to do. Jacob had obeyed, and he noticed that Jacob had obeyed his mother and gone to Padanaram. And when Esau saw that the Canaanite women did not please Isaac, his father, Esau went to Ishmael. I told you we were going to bring up Ishmael again, did I not? That's all the way back here. What is that? Chapter 16, right? In chapter 16, that's where we got this unfortunate situation that takes place. Remember, Abraham and Sarah had been told you are going to have a child in your old age. They couldn't wait. They lacked faith, I guess. And so they tried to help God. Tried to help God out. Very pharisaical in nature. A lot of folks are doing that today. And so they made up, they concocted, they did something that God never asked for with regards to this process. And that is they decided that they were going to, let's just, work this thing out on our own. And so Sarah ends up giving her handmaiden, her servant, to her husband to sleep with. Really? I know. Anyhow, she conceives. His name is Ishmael. All right. Ishmael's the guy that the Muslims use to trace their lineage back to Abraham. Muhammad came crawling out of his cave years ago, and he said to the world, listen, I am a distant relative of Abraham through Ishmael. Problem is, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Muhammad couldn't read or write, and so his information was not very biblical. His information, if he had just really stopped and thought about what he was doing, and remember what the prophecy is about Ishmael, that he's going to become a wild donkey of a man, all right, and he's going to be constantly in conflict with everybody around about him. So that's who, if Muhammad had known that, he probably would have chose somebody else to pretend that he was related to Abraham through. But anyhow, whatever the case is, I need you to understand that Ishmael is the connection, according to the Muslim world, to Abraham. Well, that Ishmael is the same one from which, the descendants of Ishmael, from which Esau is going to take a wife, according to our passage. Esau went to Ishmael and took as his wife, besides the wives he already had, Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth. And so that little bit of interlude is really all we're going to get for a while as far as Esau. He will come up later on, but not even then to any great detail. But because Jacob's going to eventually return home. But that's all we got. All right. So now we go back. So that's your little commercial break with regards to Esau. Now we're going to go back to the story of Jacob because he's our primary. And Jacob is now leaving camp and he's heading off. So Jacob left Beersheba. That's one of your questions, by the way. I'm pretty sure. Where did he leave? He leaves Beersheba and he went to Haran. And he came to a certain place and he stayed there that night because the sun had set. So along the way, he's stopping. Take a night's rest. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. Now, this is one of those more famous stories in the Bible, and it's really kind of an oddity. I don't know that I ever even tried to use a rock for a pillow. I'm going to assume that the pillow, the rock maybe had a special shape to it that was a little bit more contoured to his neck and his head. It couldn't have made a very comfortable situation. And yet, they say that, you're dreaming, and those deep dreams that you have and all that kind of stuff, it often comes because you're really, you're in the midst of something. And so he must have rested well enough to have a dream. But anyhow, he's got his head on a rock. And he dreamed, and behold, there was a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven. I wanted to mention before, this rock's going to come up again here in a minute, okay? So the rock isn't just kind of a neat little trivia question. It actually comes up later on, okay? And so he's going to have this odd dream. And there's going to be a ladder. And this ladder is going to be from the earth to heaven. Thought Gabriel did a really good job on our clue here. And it says, and behold, the Lord stood above it, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring shall be like the dust of the earth, and you shall spread abroad to the west, and to the east, to the north, and the south. And in you and your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So, Isaac's done said this, right? He said, I give you the blessing, same blessing that my daddy had. And I pass down through myself to you now. So it's already been said, but it's been said by God now. Now that's what makes, that's when you seal the deal, right? And so God now in this dream, he says, you're going to have the same promise that I gave to Abraham. And you notice that it is the same promise, essentially. Not only is he going to become a great nation, not only is he going to inherit all this land, but he's also going to be a blessing to all the world. And so, behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to the land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. If you had that kind of promise from God, what would you do? I mean, if God said, I will never leave you, I will never forsake you, what kind of courage would that develop within you? He did. That's exactly the promise that we have through Jesus. I will never leave you. I will never forsake you, God says. And it's interesting in that the same concept that is used in the word forsake, I'll never forsake you, I believe it's exactly the same word, actually. I will never forsake you is the same word, I'm pretty sure, that Jesus says on the cross when he says, Father, Father, why have you forsaken me? In other words, God will do to his one and only Son what he will not do to you if you'll just simply be faithful to him and hold his hand. He will allow his Son to go and pay the penalty on the cross, go to a point of forsakenness, and he will not he'll allow his Son to do that so that you will not have to go through that. What would you do if you had that kind of promise? You do! And this, by the way, is a promise that was made many years prior to the perfect Lamb of God being sacrificed. The promise that we have in Jesus Christ goes so far beyond the promises that were made to Abraham and the promises that were made to Jacob, etc. So he says, you're going to have this promise. Behold, I'm going to be with you, and I'm not going to leave you. Then Jacob awoke from the sleep, and he said, surely the Lord is in this place. And I say, really? Did that just now come to you? Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he's afraid, and he said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. The word for house of God here is Bethel. We're going to see that in the next frame. The house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Makes sense, right? I mean, you've seen this ladder from here to there, right? And so he's going to say, this is the very house of God. This is the very gateway to the glories. So early in the morning, Jacob took that stone. I told you he's going to come up again, didn't I? He's going to take that stone he'd been sleeping on, and he's going to set it up as a pillar, and he's going to pour oil on top of it. Another form of a sacrificial offering to God in recognition of the awesome nature of God. So he's going to pour oil on it. And he called the name of that place Bethel. But the name of the city before that was Luz. That's one of your questions too. So Jacob is going to change the name from Luz to Bethel. El is the Hebrew for God or Jehovah, okay? And so Bethel, the house of God. Then Jacob made a vow and he said this, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, because he's already promised that he would. He said, if God keeps his end of the deal, this is a real good definition of a covenant. If God keeps his end of the deal, then I will give bread to eat and clothing to wear, that he'll give me those things to take care of. Or he'll give me those things and take care of me, so that I will come again to my father's house in peace. Then the Lord shall be my God, and this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And all that you give me, I will give a full tenth to you. We'll come back to that in a moment, this tithing idea. But before I go too far, I want to bring you back to this phrase. If you will again bring me back to my father's house in peace. That's a step out on faith as far as commitment is concerned, because remember why he's leaving camp. His brother literally has made it known, I want to kill you. And so he's saying, if God will bring me back in peace, that can happen in a variety of ways. I guess God could make sure Esau dies before he comes back, or whatever. But we're going to find out in the eventual stories that he actually does come back in peace, even though he's not expecting it. And there's been a change of heart with regards to Esau. So God does work. God will keep his end of the bargain. The covenant on God's end is sure. It's our part that's really messed up at times. All right, there's your 10 questions. Let's go back and see if before I do that, I wanted to mention the tithing idea. Shall be and shall give me a full tenth to you. And so we see this whole idea of passing on a tenth, and therefore we're going to see it eventually going to be established even within the Levitical code, the commandments that are given through Moses. We're going to find the tenth is going to be very primary. Not any longer in the New Testament, according to what we have in the New Testament, because we now live in a system of grace, under a system of grace, and we live in the liberty of Christ Jesus. Now we are told to be mature, not have to have the legalistic, give me a tenth, don't measure out exactly what I'd just give from the heart. We have been prompted by God to grow up. And instead of me having to give you all the details, I want you to use your heart. Back then, they were giving a tenth. Here are your 10 questions that we've covered, I think. We've been pretty done. Got them? All right, the doodle. Again, I think Gabriel just does an amazing job. Notice that Jacob, you see he's got a little chef hat up here. Jacob is going to be traveling, and on the journey, he's going to come to he's going to come to a spot, and he's going to have that dream about the ladder that reaches from earth into heaven. Good job, Gabriel. Time to pray. I wish you would remember several things in your prayers. First of all, let's start with the 7 o'clock thing. Most of you are aware that, because I've been announcing it several weeks now, that we started something about a month ago now called the Zoom church, is what everybody seems to be referring to it as. But it's just our home church. We got several who meet with us in our home. And then we got the Zoom folks who Zoom in from all over the country, and sometimes even from outside the country. And it's just really a cool experience. And at 7 o'clock tonight, God willing, we are going to do that. Now, here's the problem. I'm on the road today. When we get done with my little home church scenario here about noon, we're going to head out, and we're headed to Kentucky because we're taking the missions team up there to go through the Creation Museum and to see the Ark Encounter. And so I don't know where I'm going to be tonight at 7 o'clock, just to be honest with you, which is not too unlike Sonny Childs, but somewhere between here and there, I hope to try to have our Zoom service. It may be abbreviated because who knows what kind of signal I'm going to have. But we're hoping to have the Zoom service tonight at 7 o'clock. The reason I bring that up is for you to pray about it. And secondarily, if you're not a part of it, all I need is an email address. Just let me know what your email is, and we'll try to pull you into that Zoom. Now, again, for those of you who are regulars, and we got a bunch of you, I don't know if I'm going to be able to pull this off or not tonight. Because I may be driving down, but I won't. If we do it, I'll let somebody else drive. But we may be going down the highway, so we're going to try. If it doesn't happen, please forgive me. Remember, MAP, I just gave you a description of our last week together. The kids have been together for 3 weeks, and man, have they done a phenomenal job. They're just finishing up a week in Memphis, Tennessee. A lot of service projects, Bible classes, on and on I could go. They're exhausted. I saw them on Thursday, and they're just whooped. But we're going to now transition into our spiritual road trip, which is designed to do two things for them. Number one, give them somewhat of a respite at the end of the long journey, a reward for all the hard work that they've done. But we always try to keep things spiritual. We always try to go somewhere that's going to have some kind of a spiritual message. And of course, going to the Ark Encounter and the Creation Museum, it's going to be all of that. And so be mindful of Mapsters, if you will. One other thing I'll say is that on the spiritual road trip, one of the assignments that they'll have is every day they're supposed to take pictures of seeing God. It's I See God contest. And they take pictures of things that they see that are amazing to them, a flower, a sunset, whatever along the way. And then they have to choose one from the day, and they will submit that to one of the directors, my son, Bryson, and he is going to be posting those online. As he posts them, we're going to be looking for folks to give likes. What's your favorite picture? And once you do that, then it'll help us to determine who wins the I Saw God Today contest. So be mindful of that and watchful of that, if you will, and participate with us along the way. It'd be very helpful for the young people and old people, because I'm going to do it too. Lastly, I want you to know that I'm going to be doing some traveling here and looking forward to coming to some very important places as far as my history of ministry is concerned. Mackville, Kentucky, love this place. I will, God willing, be there on August the 1st and get to preach that Sunday morning or be with them that Sunday morning. And so if you will, please remember that. Abbeville, Louisiana, love these folks. Longtime contributors to my ministry and to MAP. And they're way down there. You can smell the Gulf water. That's how close they are to the Gulf. But Abbeville, August 29th through 31st. And then this fall, November 5th through 7th, I'll be back at Bone Gap, one of the oldest congregations in Southern Illinois. And they're celebrating 130-something anniversary. And I'll be blessed to speak at that meeting. And so if you're in any of those areas, please come out. I'd love to hug your neck. If you're interested in having churches beginning to open up again, if you're interested in having a revival or something of that nature, please let me know. And I'd love to come your way. All right, what prayer requests do you have, if any? Is there anybody out there that wants to offer up something that we need to be praying about? While you're thinking about it and maybe posting it there for me to see, remember my buddy Rajesh in India, who's a regular contributor and watcher of our SBS programs. He makes contributes all kinds of good comments, etc. Good guy, but he is really having trouble because of the COVID mess. He's really having trouble connecting with his fiance who lives in France. He really wants to connect and they want to get married. And anyhow, visas and travel plans and all those kind of things are really a lot of monkey wrenches are being thrown into the process because of this. And he seems to be a very godly man, and I'm thankful for his faith and his positive attitude. But just be in prayer for my buddy Rajesh, would you? So thankful for him and his willingness to be a part of the School of Biblical Studies. He has for several quarters now, and does a phenomenal job in his work. Which brings me to another. How about you? Are you part of the School of Biblical Studies? It's such a simple thing. All you have to do is, again, give me an email address, and every Friday you'll receive an email from Cindy, really. And it's going to have links to the classes that I've taught that week. And then each of those will have a link to a question form. Watch the class, answer the questions, send it back. It's just that simple. And I wish more would be a part of it. We actually have a lot of folks who are, but a growing number. But I just really like to even more and more, because in these last days, we need to be doing Bible study. All right, anybody else got a prayer request out there? We're just about 30 seconds away from transitioning into our sermon time. Anyone? Nobody? All right. Lord's Day Live. Sermon time. Thank you for being here. Well, we're dealing with Revelation, the climactic chapters 19 through 22. I really could put it chapters 18 through 22, because really when you see the book of Revelation play out, and at the end of this quarter, I'm going to show you what all these pictures mean. But I see the book of Revelation actually being divided into these four parts. You might divide it differently. But the first three chapters are basically introductory to the fact that this is addressed to the church. Then the bulk of the material is talking about the disciplines that God puts upon the planet, trying to draw people back to him. Then when you get to chapter 18, which we've already covered, when you get to chapter 18, Babylon falls, and I call it the endings. Because when you get to 18, 19, and 20, we're not really calling people back to repentance anymore. At this particular point, God's done. He's fed up. And what we're going to see in chapter 19 this morning is we're going to see that Jesus is going to be covered in blood, because he's leading the armies of heaven out against the wicked. So chapter 18, Babylon falls. Chapter 19, Jesus on a white horse leads his folks out of heaven. And you probably can't see it here, but the birds up here, they're going to feast upon the flesh of the wicked. And then in chapter 20, we're going to see that the dragon will be, Satan himself will be cast down into that pit, never to be seen again. Then we're going to go into the wonderful climactic ending to this book in chapters 21 and 22 with the beginnings. So that's where we are at, and that's what we're going to spend the rest of this quarter dealing with as we talk about Revelation verse by verse. Here are your questions. Here's a review of where we've been. You might recall coming on down here that we just got done talking about this whole idea of the marriage supper of the Lamb. And I asked the question, nobody really responded to it. I still got the open door for you to talk to me about this. Is this actually the marriage of the Lamb, or is this just the invitation to the marriage of the Lamb? I'm not sure that we can be very conclusive on this, but it is interesting because notice he says, blessed are those who are invited to the marriage supper. Talks about the clothes that they can wear, but he's also talking about the invitation. So is this actually the marriage supper itself, or is it the invitation? I don't know. But it is interesting that what happens next is not very merry. Very merry. It's not indicative of a marriage feast. Let me put it that way. Notice what happens next. Verse 11, then I saw heaven open, and behold, a white horse. The one sitting on it is called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. That's why, and we'll see that further here in just a moment, okay? The idea of it being a white horse is indicative of a lot of things, okay? But I think that if you allow the Bible to interpret the Bible, you don't even have to go to Jewish history to get this. You just let the Bible interpret the Bible, stay even within the same book. And notice what happened way back in chapter 2. We have this promise. He who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Guess what? To the one who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give him a white stone. Whatever you do with the word white, or the description of white, it seems to be connected with victory. It seems to be connected with one who has overcome. Okay? The reason that's interesting is because I want you to notice that Jesus is already riding on the white horse. This is not a coming home, dragging all the prisoners of war with me. This is going into battle before he ever gets started. He's on a white horse. You know why? Because as was said to me many years ago, and probably you too, the theme of the book of Revelation is we win. God's known it all along. I'm not sure Satan has. Maybe he has. Satan is not all-knowing, by the way. I think that, right up to the end, he's going to be, pressing, hoping that he can overcome, I think that's what's going to be happening. Remember, he's going to be bound for 1,000 years, then released for a short period of time. I think even in that short period of time, he's probably going to have the hope that somehow he can pull out a victory here. Well, he can't. All right? God says that through many references that he's going to win. We're going to win. Those of us who are faithful, part of the small number of remnant, we're going to win. And one of the ways he does that is he talks about Jesus riding on a white horse right into battle. This isn't a victory lap coming home. This is a going out into battle. He's already on a white horse. I love that. All right, notice that he is going to be called Faithful and True, which is, I don't guess anybody's all that surprised about it, but I just thought it'd be interesting to go ahead and show you some of the history of that. Notice you go all the way back to the very first chapter, only 5 verses in, and from Jesus Christ, the faithful witness. And then you pedal forward to chapter 3, and to the angel of the church at Laodicea write the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness. And so this idea of him being faithful and true is not something that should shock us. But it is something that I think should bring us to a conclusion that we hold in our heart whenever dealing with any other controversies around about us, and that is this: God is consistent. He's faithful. He is true. He is going to come through. In our Bible classes just a few moments ago, we were talking about Jacob. Jacob's running from camp because his brother Esau wants to kill him. And he has that dream, you remember, the ladder stretching to heaven. And after that, he's all about God. And he sets up that pillar, pours oil on it, etc. there at Bethel, from Bethel. And you remember all that transpires. Well, one of the things that Jacob says in that story is, if God will bring me back to my father's house in peace, then he will be my God, etc., etc. It was a remarkable statement of Jacob because he was saying something that at the moment didn't seem very likely. Esau wants to kill me, but if someday I can go back in peace, God will continue to be my God. Well, God is one of those who is faithful. He is always faithful. And I'm confident that Jacob had no way of knowing this, but years are going to pass and Jacob will return, and he's going to be actually scared to death when he approaches, thinking that Esau, oh no, there's Esau. He's going to come and kill us all, But he doesn't. God works it out because God is always faithful. Anyhow, Jesus is called the faithful and true. If that is also accurate, and it is, then it should cause everyone who is an enemy of the Lord to shudder. Even the demons believe and what? Tremble. And rightly they should, because God is faithful. God is true. And when he says, I will repay, when he says, vengeance is mine, it will happen. May not happen in the time frame that I feel like it ought to happen, but it's going to happen. Notice again a side of God that we don't often get from the warm fuzzies of our people, but he's the faithful and true and righteous. He judges and watches. He makes war. You know what makes war means? It means he initiates it. He goes to war. He makes war against. So he makes war. His eyes are like flame of fire. I've done it, you've done it probably, but I sat in, long-winded sermon and about to fall out the pew because I was so bored as a child, whatever it may be, and maybe I was picking on my neighbor or passing notes or whispering or what, and I got the eye from my mom across the room. Now, her eyes were not flaming fire, and I'm telling you, they burn a hole right into my heart. Well, Jesus has eyes that are flaming fire. So those who are coming up against the Lord, you ever been scared to death by the look your mom gave you? It ain't nothing like what you're going to see if you're the enemy of God and you see the eyes of Jesus. On his head are many diadems, and he has a name written on it no one knows but himself. Two things there that I thought were interesting, but obviously he's king. He's kingly. So you've got diadems on his head. The other thing no one knows is the name of Jesus, in that there is such an intimacy to who Jesus is, such a private nature in some regards to who Jesus is, that there are some things that perhaps even throughout eternity, you and I will never fully experience or understand about the Lord. We will be like him, but we are not going to be him. He is clothed in a robe dipped in blood. Dipped in blood. When you see that, there's two things that come to mind here, both the sacrificial concept of him being the Lamb of God, but also the fact that he's in a bloody battle. I'm not sure which of those necessarily has to play out completely as far as the interpretation of this. Maybe both of them should come to mind, but notice that he is dipped, his robe is dipped in blood. When you go to Hebrews chapter 10, how much worse punishment do you think will be deserved by the one who has trampled underfoot the Son of God? Pause for a moment. We saw in chapter 18, we saw that Babylon has fallen. And the reason is because the great harlot was drunk on the blood of the saints. In other words, she has trampled the people of God. She has been a blasphemous influence. Well, it's going to be bad for her. Profaned and has profaned the blood of the covenant by which he was his sacrifice saints. Blood of covenant by which he was sanctified and was outraged and has outraged the Spirit of grace. Man, for we know him who said, vengeance is mine. That's what we're dealing with here. Vengeance is mine, I will repay. He is faithful. It's going to happen. I will repay. And again, the Lord will judge his people. It is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. It's a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Think about that. You don't want to go there. Proverbs chapter 1. If you want to see one of the most graphic descriptions of God in his vengeance, read Proverbs chapter 1. It's a scary chapter. Moving on then, his clothes dipped in blood, name is called the Word of God, and the armies of heaven arrayed in fine linen. Wow, am I having trouble? Forgive me, Father. And the armies of heaven arrayed in fine linen, white and pure, were following him on, watch it, they're also on victory horses. Revelation 19, let us rejoice and exalt and give him the glory, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. Watch it, and has granted her to clothe herself with fine linen, bright and pure. That's interesting. There's only one word here that's different as you describe the armies of heaven, and that is this idea of white. Up here it's bright and pure. Here it's white and pure. But it seems to be pretty obvious that whoever he's talking about here, he's also talking about here. So he's leading the armies of heaven out against the wickedness of the world. Revelation 6, again, and 7, allowing the Bible to interpret itself. Then they were each given white robes and told to rest a little longer. These are the ones crying out from underneath the altar, Lord, how long until you avenge us? And God says, a little bit longer. And they're given white robes and told to wait. Chapter 7, these are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and have made them white in the blood of the Lamb. And so the whiteness idea here continues to come up. The idea of victory, purity, all of that kind of thing comes up. And we see that the armies of heaven, the church of God, has that. All right, let's come on down. For his mouth, sharp, following him on white horses, victory horses. From his mouth comes a sharp sword with which to strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. So he's going to be firm in his judgment. He will tread the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God. You might recall we've already covered, chapter 16. Yeah, chapter 16, we covered the bowls of wrath. All right, well, they are the climactic moments, actually, of the wrath of God, because we've already seen prior to that, we've got the 7 seals, etc., that happen there. And so 7 trumpets, all of these things are showing the wrath of God that is coming. This is the wrath of God. This is not the tribulation of man on man. This is the wrath of God. And he says that he will tread the winepress of the fury of the wrath of God. Let me go one last. And on his robe and on his thigh was the name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So that's who Jesus is. He is the King of all, the Lord of all. All right. This last paragraph, although very interesting, I only found 2 little things that I wanted to point out specifically because it's more descriptive than anything, but they're very important, specifically about the beast and the false prophet. After that, sees Jesus leading his army out. After that, he's going to see an angel standing in the sun, and with a loud voice, he's going to call to all the birds that fly directly overhead. And it's basically going to be an invitation. Come feast on the folks that Jesus and his folks are going to whoop up on. Come gather for the great supper of God, to eat the flesh of the kings, the flesh of the captives, the flesh of the mighty men, and the flesh of the horses and the riders, and the flesh of all men, both free and slave, both small and great. And I saw the beasts and the kings of the earth with their armies gathered to make war against him who was sitting on the white horse and against his army. So these folks who the birds are going to come down and feast upon they're the army. They're the army of the beast and the false prophet. Essentially, they're the army of Satan. And they're going to come out against Jesus, but they're not going to succeed. And the beast was captured in the middle of the battle, and the false prophet was also captured, who is in its presence had done the signs by which he deceived those who had received the mark of the beast and those who had worshipped its image. Whatever the mark of the beast is, it has to do with the predominance of influence in your life. And so I am marked as a servant, a slave. I'm marked as a participant in the values of. And remember, you receive a mark of God if you are of the faithful. Well, the false prophet is the one who is going to encourage the masses to receive the mark of the beast. And so we got to watch for false prophets. And this was a specific false prophet, but we got to watch for false prophets among us even today. The Antichrist influence is live and well today, we are told by John. All right. They, by the way, are going to be captured, and then it says they're going to be thrown alive into the lake of fire that burns with sulfur. And so this is the end of the beast and the false prophet as they're thrown down there. and they're gone. The rest are going to be slain by the sword that came from the mouth of him who was sitting on the horse, and all the birds were gorged with their flesh. And so the conclusion of the paragraph is as the opening of the paragraph. We got the invitation to the birds, come, the great supper of God, feast on the flesh of the bad guys. And as he concludes the paragraph, you got that these birds are going out and they're just literally gorging themselves on the flesh, because when the wrath of God, the vengeance of God is unleashed, it's unleashed. And so it's a very, very bloody, bloody day filled with death, carnage, and endings. That's our section, right? The endings, the great destruction that's taking place. Let's go back so I'll make sure you get your questions. All right. School of Biblical Studies, there are your questions. Got them? All right. Time for sharing. Please remember, our little ministry had a lot of expenses this summer with regards to various things. The MAP Board of Directors asked each of the folks who are hosting the kids this summer if they would take the expense upon themselves and their little home church, which we did, and we're to feed the house, etc. It's been a marvelous, marvelous summer, but there's been quite a financial expense. And if you could help our ministry out as we cover that, that would be such a blessing. Lord's Supper Fellowship is the most intimate part of the entire week. I pray that you'll stop. Here in just a moment, I'm going to go in there before we head out on our journey. We're going to stop and we're going to think about God. We're going to take communion. We're going to worship together, because I can't think of a better way to summon the blessings of God upon our trip than to think about his son. And we're going to do that. I pray that as you stop today in your little intimate moment with the Lord, that it will be just that, intimate. Jesus died for you. Stop and think about that and give him the glory that he deserves. Thanks for being with me this morning. This is Sonny Chow saying, be there. Matthew 16:26.